I'll never get tired of your over-the-top reactions. What the hell? What is this? Like Bernard Black from Black Books.
He is an inspirational character to me for sure. All right, let me. How do I find? Oh wait. Okay. Like we've been off a week, so I have no idea how to do any of this anymore. It's not great.
Yeah, ironically as well, I was talking about, hey, you're going to wear a mask. It's your choice. You're going to put yourself at risk. We need to get used to it, blah, blah, blah. And then big fat mouth over here ends up with COVID for the week. And let me
Yeah, but that
tell
wasn't even
you,
your like you. Even if you wore a mask, though, it wouldn't have helped in your
no,
particular instance. So
no, in my situation, we had every time we have a little get together at my home, it somehow turns into a super spreader event. And it did again. And yeah, so I ended up with COVID. I will say this. If you're one of the people who are still sitting on the fence about whether to go get vaccinated or not, I've had 3 shots and it was rough. So I would say, like, there is that nasty variant getting around, and Canberra is rife with it at the moment. So if you're still on the fence, go talk to your actual doctor, not Dr. YouTube or Dr. Google, and discuss your options because, yeah, it's rough.
okay, I pressed the right button that time. All right. Okay, it
We're
is
here.
July now. Welcome to the Modern Meltdown live stream. I'm here with Matt as always. We were off last week because I hope if you were tuning into the pre-show, Matt got COVID.
I got COVID.
Yeah. So how was your experience with COVID, Matt?
So I actually thought it was going to be a bit easier than it was. First day I woke up and went and got tested because I ended up with a sore throat that felt a little bit more acute than normal. And I know that's a hard way to describe it, or maybe to understand what I'm trying to get across, but it was a sore throat that felt a little bit different to a normal cold and flu.
Mm-hmm.
After about 2 days, the sore throat went away, the stuffiness started, blocked nose for about 2 days, 3 days. The thing that got to me the most, and what I would set it apart from most cold and flus, was the headaches and the fatigue. It was me and Holly, my partner Holly, on both my wife and partner in Weird Crap in Australia. We tried to split everything in half as best we could. So it's like she would do a load of laundry and then finish that and then be like, I need a nap. And then I'd try and cook us a meal. And like just doing those very basic things really, really took it out of me. And that's what scared me the most about it. It's just like that fatigue aspect. And the cluster headaches, which I'm still unfortunately experiencing even a week after the fact.
Oh shit!
So
I'm
yeah,
hoping you don't have much of that long COVID stuff, dude.
yeah, a lot of people have talked about long COVID. I went back to work for my first full shift last night, and it was hard. They also discussed the brain fogginess as well. We recorded an episode of Weird Crap in Australia last night, and it was a little bit trickier than most of the time, but I am on the mend, and today is the first day I've woken up headache free. Of course, you're about to read something, Tommy, which I think may induce an instantaneous headache.
Yeah. Do you want to do that first?
Let's do it. Let's
Okay.
start the day off with a laugh.
Okay. So I have found a way to bypass paywalls, Matt, and so I have been finding myself reading more of the Australian. So
Oh God.
here is a treat from you, from Peta Credlin, that I want to read in its entirety because Jesus Christ. Decline of Christianity is a loss for everyone, the title says. Amid all the social trends that this week's census data reveals, none is more significant than the truly seismic collapse in religious belief, especially in Christian faith. Doubtless many will come to this. Indeed, why should any of us have the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen? Given as we now know from a myriad of official reports that the success followers of St. Peter have been guilty of the most appalling human betrayals. Even if there was once a Nazarene who said to his friend, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Surely it was an impossible hope to think that any human institution could last millennia, especially when it has so often fallen so far short of its ideals. But lest we merely note that this as just another one of the many interesting contemporary social trends, let's consider the centrality of Christian inspiration to Western civilization and ponder the impact on the institutions and the attitudes we value. If the underlying religious convictions that created them are rapidly fading away. 50 years back in 1971, 87% of Australians identified as religious and overwhelmingly as Christian. Now it's just 54%. And here's the really striking feature. Only 5 years ago, 52% of us identified as Christian. Now it's just 44%. That's an almost 20% decline in Christian belief in just 5 years. Some of that will be people who don't worship regularly anymore and feel fraudulent in ticking the religion box even though their faith is still with them. For others, it represents a clear rejection of organized religion. 5 years back, only 30% of us identified as having no religion. Now it's 39%. That's a 30% leap in just 5 years, making no religion the fastest growing creed in the country. Why does that matter? It may not be fashionable to say so, but the way we live is unimaginable without a Christian cultural foundation. Our democracy, for instance, rests on the notion that everyone is equal in rights and dignity, something that's come down to us through the Christian Gospels, apparently. It's on this very principle, as an example, that I reject the idea of a race-based body in our Constitution in the form of the Indigenous voice to Parliament, and it's disappointing to see some religious leaders support it because it's anathema to the fundamentals of Christian faith.
Sorry, let's just stop here for 1 minute. So, in one paragraph, Peter, and I'm fucking impressed with her. I'll tell you that. In one paragraph, she turns around and says, "Everyone deserves recognition, dignity, equality, except Indigenous people, because Christian reasons that I'm not going to go into." That contradicts the last bit of Christianity that I pumped forward as its cheerleader. So which is it? This is what I love about religious people. They just can't get it all together. It's like if you the religious people I respect, well, not respect, but at least I can understand, Tommy, are the bigots, because
Okay.
at least they're straight down the path. This is what the Bible says. I follow it 100%. There's no wishy-washiness with those people. They're assholes, but they're honest about it. I love when Peta Credlin's like, Christianity has produced in us a distinct ability to treat everyone uniquely, fairly, correctly, justly, and then turns around and goes, except for Indigenous people. We don't want any of that.
Yeah. I mean, she has, like, we'll go on, but she does talk about multiculturalism to some extent later, I think, as well. But yeah, like look, I mean, she is a bigot.
Absolutely,
but
she is.
Because she's a media person, she is adept at sort of masking that in this sort of reasoning, I guess. Because this is a bigoted stance, but there is a logical framework or a logical argument that she's posing that doesn't, on its face, seem bigoted. The result is bigotry. But yeah.
You can use that sort of, and this is why we have to be very, very careful, especially of right-wing pundits, and even to a certain extent left-wing pundits as well. When you are very when you wear your ideology on your sleeve, you have to get very, very good at being able to reframe arguments so that they sound very, very agreeable. That they don't sound extreme, and you have to use language to rework them to make them sound more appeasing, more appealable. But simply put, she's a bigot, and in that one paragraph, she admits she's a bigot, but she wants to pretend that her framing of Christianity is one that's pure and good and unified, and that's what people like that do all the time. You got to be very careful of them.
Yeah. All right, I'll continue reading. Elsewhere in our culture, our justice system rests on the notion that we should treat others as we'd be treated ourselves. I don't know if that's actually true, but okay,
It's
Peter.
not our justice system is not, as I've said to many people, we don't have a justice system, we have a legal system, and that legal system and the outcomes of that legal system depend on a multitude of variables. One of those variables is how much money do you have to buy a good lawyer?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure like most modern countries that espouse like good justice and are anti-corrupt and things like that don't have eye for an eye style systems of punishment. You
Yeah,
know, which is
absolutely.
what she's sort of talking about here. Again, something that's come down to us through Christian teaching. It's it, it's like she doesn't understand that yeah, treat others how you should be treated cannot exist without the Bible or some shit.
You know, I've had this debate with people before. There are people in my life who, uh, I identify as an atheistic person. What does that mean for me? It means that I don't believe that there's. Sorry, I don't. I always fall into that trap of using the word believe. I have not been presented with empirical evidence that a creator exists in any way, shape, or form, whatever form you want that to be. So I identify as an atheistic person because of that. People will often tell me, "Well, no, you're Christian." I go, "Explain that to me." Well, every country is based on Christian values. And I'm like, well, if you want to if you want to use that argument, then every single country is more Grecian than they are Christian. And they said, what do you mean? It's like, well, the bedrock of what we now know as democracy was started in Greece and Athens, was also adopted in a form by the Romans. Does that mean we're Roman Christians? It's one of those silly, and the Romans, they weren't even Christian until halfway through the Reformation of the Empire. So it's a silly argument to make. Just because a lot of people subscribe to something does not mean that that's the foundation of your society. Eventually, what happened with Christianity, and you can go all the way back to the 1800s. The churches were basically run by thugs and thieves who wanted to take money from people, and they came up with a system of tithing where, Tommy, if you went out and committed adultery, you could pay the church enough money so that you could still get into heaven. Okay,
Yeah.
like that's you had your adultery, you paid your fine, you're still getting back into heaven. That system has just been adapted over the last 2,000 odd years, and they continue to retrofit it and retrofit it and retrofit it. But the fact is that uh, at a certain point, the democracy, justice systems, law systems, all of that starts all the way back in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Elsewhere in our culture, oh wait, no, I've heard that. Something that's come down to us through Christian teachings. Our sense of community too rests on the notion that we should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. It's a commandment that lies at the heart of our volunteerism and philanthropy. Then there's
But
the
we
not.
shouldn't give indigenous people their rights.
Yeah, well, they're not our neighbors.
Oh, right.
They're other people, Matt. They're heathens.
Right.
Then there's the not insignificant matter of what religious organizations contribute in terms of social uplift. Beyond a values based education, they run an abundance of health and community services. To reference the largest Christian denomination, the Catholic Church, as an example, there are 80 Catholic hospitals across the country and 25,000 plus aged care beds in Catholic nursing homes, as well as social welfare bodies and charities with a broader Christian inspiration. From the Salvation Army to the St. Vincent de Paul Society to Anglicare to Lifeline and Alcoholics Anonymous, all organizations that are generally thought to be serving Australians well, however discredited the zeitgeist might find the faith which inspires their good works.
I love how, to legitimize her argument there, Salvation Army, of course, religious organization, St. Vincent de Paul, religious organization, Anglicare, religious organization, to Lifeline, Now, when you chuck in a secular organization there, helps to legitimize your bullshit point.
Well,
Salvation Army have been investigated during the Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse. Salvation Army are also very reluctant, if will at all, assist people who identify in the LGBT community because you have to be a Catholic to use their services most of the time. They're very resident to help people who are single mothers as well, right? Not very Christian. Same with the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and same with Anglicare. Lifeline is a secular organization that doesn't discriminate, but are horribly underfunded. Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the one thing she's actually correct on. Alcoholics Anonymous did actually start out of the church. So out of the 5 there, she's right. She's right 1/5 of the time. Good job.
I mean that's a decent amount for a Christian, I suppose. Okay. For several decades, Christianity has been giving away other religious and cultural traditions. The federal parliament might still start with the Lord's Prayer, but only after an acknowledgement of country. Christian beliefs and Christian representatives are routinely mocked and ridiculed in the public square. The witch hunt against Cardinal George Pell is only the most extreme instance.
Yeah, that witch hunt, which is backed up by witness testimony, and it upsets me too when they talk about this because unlike Peta Credlin, we've actually done the research. Holly and I produced a 3-part series on the child sexual abuse that was uncovered in this country during the Royal Commission into institutionalized childhood sexual abuse in this country. Cardinal Pell, at his very least worst, was involved in covering up child sexual abuse. And people like Peta Credlin will turn around and say, oh, well, it was just the style of the time. Which says to me, how heartless do you have to be to see a child being abused and not say anything and not do anything? So Cardinal Pell, at his least worst, is a pedophile enabler. And that's documented, that's recorded. No one can argue with that, not even Peta Credlin. So yeah, her little witch hunt against Cardinal Pell. I mean, how much money are they paying these people? Like, what's the advantage here? And she's a woman. I mean, if you want a literal interpretation of the Bible, she shouldn't even be writing this article.
Yeah. And I find it interesting, like, she uses the word the witch hunt against Cardinal George Pell, right? But aren't like witch hunts very much within Christian tradition?
The witch hunt began, it was designed by the Catholic Church. They would send out organized witch hunters in the 1800s. They would track down anyone that they deemed was a witch. Now, that could be people suffering from dementia. It could have been recluses. So, grandma, she's getting a bit on in years. It's 1800s is a hard era to look after grandma. Grandma's got a bit of dementia. She's a bit crazy. You put her out in a cabin out in the woods. The town says she's crazy and she's a witch. Catholic Church sends in a witch hunter. Panic is kicked up, and then they murder grandmother. And that's generally the tradition of witch hunting. The other thing is they went after people who were if you're a woman and you're outspoken, guess what? You're going to be stripped naked, inspected by an inquisitor, who is then going to murder you. And the test that they would have at the end, it's a fascinating test. But you would be tied to a stone, thrown in a body of water. If you floated to the top, you're a witch. But if you drowned a good Christian woman.
Yeah. So I find it interesting because she's espousing all of this Christian good moralism, but just ignores all of the bad shit, like how they started the witch hunts, how they treat other people, heathens, essentially, all that stuff.
Yep.
In a way, okay, so Christian representatives are routinely mocked and ridiculed in the public square in a way that other faiths, Judaism perhaps accepted, never would be. And this can be expected to intensify given that most schools are now not only indifferent but often hostile to Christian faith and often ignorant too to Christian knowledge. And again,
But
ignoring
not,
shit like the
but not the
Crusades,
Jews.
etc. Yeah.
The Jews just get to do whatever they want whenever they want to do it.
No,
This
no,
is
okay, no,
something
no,
that
okay.
this
Matt,
is
in fairness
Christians love
to
bringing this
Peter,
one
she
up.
does say Judaism is accepted as so. Christianity wins if not for the Jews existing in terms
Yep.
of religious persecution. So she
When-
at least says that, but I mean, what Christians did to the Hindus or the Buddhists in Asia and stuff like that. Anyway,
Look, yeah, I mean, you want to go through history. When it comes to Judaism, it's always their favorite scapegoat. They're like, no one talks about the Jewish religion. That's like lots of people talk about the Jewish religion. Lots of people talk about how Orthodox Jewish people will try and force people into marriages. There's some great organizations that are set up in America that try and help prevent organized marriages, which still occur in American Jewish populations. I'm sure they occur here as well. You know, the idea is that because the Jews suffered a tremendous amount during World War II, Christians often say, well, you know, they killed our savior, but because that really bad thing happened, everyone is always on their side. No one would ever question them. But once again, that's those sort of comments. This is where you have to read between the lines here. Those sort of comments are dog whistlers to a very particular group of people that live in Australia. And they're not very nice.
yeah,
And they really like the book Mein Kampf.
it just goes to show like the general conservative / right wing ability to just completely make themselves the victim at every opportunity.
Yeah. I'm the victim. These people have it easier than me, while also dog whistling to authoritarians who would absolutely curb stomp the rest of us into the fucking pavement.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. It's the right wing playbook.
Yeah. To continue, rightly, young Australians are taught to respect the dreaming stories and Indigenous spirituality. But how many would be readily familiar with any of the Bible stories other than the Christmas one, despite their centrality in our culture? How many would understand the significance of Easter, except as a holiday with too much chocolate? Of course, faith is a matter of spiritual conversion that can't be learnt like a lesson, but any Australian who's not at least familiar with the Gospels is culturally impoverished, even if not always spiritually worse off. She just had a sentence about like how it's right that young Australians are taught the dreaming stories and Indigenous spirituality. Like, that's good. And then at the end, if you're not Christian, you're spiritually worse off. It's like, come on, man. That's one paragraph.
Yeah.
And I grew up and I knew about Easter. I knew way more about Easter than any like Aboriginal stories. Like, this is insane. She does like her view of the world is completely inaccurate.
Yeah. You know, the reason, of course, that children in schools are taught, and this is one of those things that's, you know, we look at our friends over the pond over in New Zealand now. The relationship between colonialness in New Zealand and the native Maori populations, the way that they've sort of, you know, formed as a country is a little bit different. There were still atrocities committed against the native populations there, but through a lot of tireless work, the Maori population has made sure that you know, their culture has survived in a significant way in New Zealand. You know, for example, when I went over to New Zealand on my honeymoon, lovely country, lovely people. They have a Maori spoken language news service, right? We don't have that in Australia for First Nations people. And the reason that we're now making sure that children understand the history behind First Nations people is because for the last 80, 100 years, we have done anything and everything we can to remove them from the history of this country.
Yeah, we try to wipe
And
out their
it,
existences entirely. It's fucked up.
yeah, exactly. So now what needs to happen is you do need to have a corrective, you need corrective action. And the way that you do that is by introducing children to these stories. And we've covered a lot of the Dreamtime stories on Weird Crap in Australia because it's great. It's really, really fascinating. That's the one thing about all the religions is that Christianity, and maybe this is why they're so sore about it, and I see this through a nerd lens,
Mm.
right? You know, you've got your Justice Leagues, you've got your Avengers, very exciting characters. In Christianity, you know, people of the Hindu faith have very interesting, the visually interesting depictions of their gods. They have multiple gods. They have amazing stories. You know, when you look at the Norse mythology, you know, they've got these exciting stories with over the top characters and all these sort of things to the point where we're now reusing them in comic books. And Christianity has Jesus. That's about it. And it's not that exciting.
Yeah, the Bible has shit stories. It's insane that it's got as much of a foothold it has, considering how shit its stories are. But anyway, look,
It's
we need to
just
finish
it's
this thing off.
easily
Matt.
digestible, I think.
Yeah, maybe. I guess. um, Tellingly, the census data this week revealed that mental illness is now our most prevalent chronic health condition, ahead of arthritis and asthma, and doubtless this owes much to the decline of the beliefs that gave the lives of our forebears spiritual comfort and purpose. Can you believe this tying together of two completely different things?
Yep. So let's break that down a little bit. And a broken clock is right twice a day. Now, I think she is somewhat right, and that may surprise you, Tommy, to hear me say that.
I'm gonna
There is
fight you on
one
this,
thing
dude.
that has been lost in society through the ditching of organized religion, and that is something that is very important for our mental health, which is social interaction. So I will say that from that perspective, the frequency of people meeting other people in real life, having conversations, working on projects together, it's the one time that I'll actually agree with assholes like Peter Credlin or Jordan Peterson, regardless of how that should be vectored to people, that social interaction. I don't necessarily believe that Christianity is the best vector for that social interaction. I will agree with them that the lack of social interaction that people have now is definitely leading to where we are today, where they've replaced that social interaction with anonymous echo chamber internet activity. And that is a massive, massive problem.
Okay,
Um,
Matt. Okay, I
go
think I've got
ahead.
the yeah. I think we got the argument. It's for me. I will still never agree with Peter Credlin on this, or anyone who says that like religiosity is going to lead to better mental health,
Yeah,
because
that
that
I
is an
disagree
aspect
with. Yeah.
of community building that we can all do. Like I think
Yep.
a lot of people in like activist spaces and things like that, um, and like little communities that you build online can be beneficial. It's this chronic one mental illness as a chronic health condition is really quite a new phenomenon. Okay, so the forebears that Peter Credlin is talking about here probably didn't even fucking realize that they were mentally unwell, that they could actually fix it with certain things, right?
Yep.
Those people were probably just cast aside and like rejected from Christianity when it was big because they were pariahs or whatever, right? Like mental health
Take
stuff
Yeah,
wasn't a
well,
thing that
take
existed.
our veterans through most conflicts. You know, you go back to World War II; those men came back to Australia. They were shell shocked. They had post traumatic stress syndrome. They were handed a Bible, told to get a job, and then some of them, you know, became domestic abuse perpetrators because they were broken people. Then now obviously, Tommy, you have a personal stake in this as well, But after the Vietnam conflict, again, Vietnam veterans come back to Australia after being fighting in a war that they shouldn't have been fighting in the first place, with post-traumatic stress syndrome. They're handed a Bible, told to join a Christian group, become alcoholics, end up on the street, and we still abandon them. So, where was Christianity to help those people? And that's just a very small example of the people that needed to be helped with mental issues.
Yeah, and the spiritualness of it wouldn't have mattered anyway. But
No,
and the other
absolutely
thing is,
not.
yeah, like you can how you get past that is not by building more goddamn fucking churches for people to congregate in. Is to like have parks and build more infrastructure that's less alienating, like the suburbs and stuff like that. You build more like the super blocks in Europe. But yeah, anyway, I'll continue.
Or
As an
offer people a grant and say, hey, if your community would like to build a little community hall, here's $20,000. Organize a working bee, we'll pay for it.
Yeah. Like one of
You know?
my local MPs sends a thing out in the mail saying, "Hey, do you want to do some volunteering?"
Yeah.
And like that kind of stuff is what you get. That's how you build these connections without having to be fucking religious about it. But yeah, let's
Like just in our local area as well, to spruik some local businesses. Ronin Games in Woden constantly does Magic the Gathering get-togethers, as does the game's capital, as does and there's also places to hang out and play games in tournaments like Reload Bar in Garima Place. There are lots of different places where you can go out and seek that social interaction, and I'm glad that they exist. And they didn't exist as much when I was a kid, but I'm really glad that they do now, because that gives, like, if you live in the metropolitan areas, there's so much shit to do to get that social interaction as well.
yeah, you just need to be more active, and we as society, as a government, need to incentivize that more. But anyway, look, we got to finish this goddamn article off. I don't. As an imperfect Christian myself who doesn't always agree with the teachings of my faith, I don't claim to know how an increasingly godless society might be re-evangelized. Okay, just that there's so much that we'll miss when it's gone. Yeah, as individuals and as a society. It's worth noting another key feature of the census, the fact that a larger proportion of our population is born overseas than in any other developed country. More than 50% of us are now foreign born or have at least one foreign born parent, and that's much less these days in the UK or New Zealand, and increasingly in India and China. Right? She's making she's creating a wedge here. By implication, right? Like foreign-born parents, and that's much less these days in the UK or New Zealand, where it's proper, and increasingly it's in India and China. That's abhorrent because they're less Christian, right?
Yep.
Again,
is the argument here that more Chinese people are born in China and India than Australians are born in Australia because we're not religious enough and not enough, and because we're not religious enough, not enough white Australians are fucking?
I don't know if it's that kind of
issue?
argument. It's just a general xenophobia, I think.
Yeah.
And it's an anti-white
racism
sort of a dealie.
Yeah.
Again, on the issue of the voice, so she's going back to that old grudge. Creating two class of Australian by virtue of their race risks unsettling the great multicultural nation we have become, with the implicit message that only those with a demonstrated Aboriginal genealogy are legitimate, that the rest of us are somehow less worthy. It goes without saying that professing religion doesn't make anyone a better person. Still, on their own ways, every faith calls us to be better, religious or not. Australia remains a wonderful country and the best place in the world to live, but there's plenty to work on if we are to stay that way, and much we should protect. Now, Michael said this in the chat, and I'm a bit angry that he basically preempted what I was going to say. But what we get from reading this kind of diatribe is the absolute inability of people like Peta Credlin to think of ways in which they can come to moral and like good outcomes without being explicitly told by something, right? You need religion, or else you don't know what the law is. Don't murder someone. I know that because God told me that it was bad, right? And that's the issue. A lot of people like this will only have that kind of argument because they're dumb and they can only find a moral framework through a book or some bullshit. Whereas most normal people, and why it's okay that we get rid of this get rid of religion, is because religions, for the most part, just tell you the stuff. And the problem with that is you don't come to those conclusions yourself, and you can't like figure out what's actually good or bad. Like I know that murdering is bad because if I logic it out, it means it's a bad outcome for all of society if you're allowed to just murder people, right? A god didn't need to tell me that. I came to that conclusion myself. And so I have much more faith in that moral core than someone who says, I don't murder people because a religion told me to. Because I know that person, if that religion told them to murder someone, they would absolutely goddamn do it. And I can just point to the Crusades and be proven right about that.
Yeah, well, those people who fought in the Crusades, though, they were given a pardon by the Pope at the time, though, so it's all good.
Yeah.
They're allowed to. You're 100% right. Like it's one of the points that people often bring up is like, and this is one of the most tied points that I've heard about this particular issue. Hitler was an atheist. All right, fine, he was an atheist, but how many religious leaders have committed horrible atrocities and they were religious? Many Christians do it. Many people from many different backgrounds have done horrendous things. What is happening over in modern day Israel at the moment is what has been labeled as apartheid. The back and forth between them and the Palestinian people. And could you say that modern day Israelites are committing horrible atrocities against their neighbors? Absolutely, you could. And they're religious as fuck.
Hmm.
Religion does not dictate morality. Generally, what dictates morality is one or two things: the potential for punishment, being our law system. Although I also like to point out that our legal system far surpasses the biblical legal system. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, all that sort of jazz is great. But there's nothing in the Bible about raping someone. All right. In many places, it advocates raping someone. We have laws against rape because you shouldn't take away someone's ability to say no. You shouldn't force someone out of consent. It's a horrible fucking thing to do. It's a very violent act. So we have laws against that. We have laws against embezzlement. We have laws against coercion. We have laws against organized crime. We have very specific laws because our society has changed and evolved over time. Now, what's happening, especially in this country, is that there are people who are deshackling from this need to have a religion. My honest personal feelings towards all of it is I am absolutely happy for you to have your religion. You should have your religion. You should have freedom of choice. That freedom of choice should be contained to your church and it should be contained to your home. And it shouldn't be imposed on me because I'm not making that choice.
Yeah.
Right now, what we're seeing, especially in the world, and this is extraordinarily alarming, is supposed democracies like America are winding back abortion rights due to religious belief systems that they are now trying to impose on their over 300 million population.
Yeah.
This is a
It's
problem.
fucked.
And this is what happens when religious evangelicals are allowed to prop themselves up and move into positions of power. Now, the Americans they're moving to a tipping point, and how that all plays out in the next couple of years is going to be very, very interesting. But their evangelical devotion, which is something that Americans really didn't give that much of a shit about until around the 70s and the start of the satanic panic. There was a lot of child abuse going on, so they needed a boogeyman. So satanic ritual abuse was what was blamed and has led them to the point that they're in now. We can see the destructiveness that religious integration and government can do to a population. It can take away people's freedom of choice. If we were to be a fundamentalist Christian society, my friends would be arrested or hunted or murdered for the simple fact that they don't identify as heterosexual, for example. My wife would not have her own agency, would not be allowed to open a bank account. I, as a white male, would have all the privileges in the world. And as a white male, I can say I'm not really happy with that situation. I don't like that idea. Not a great idea. So there's this whole level of inbuilt discrimination, control, and power imbalance that's built into Christianity because it's a 2,000-year-old, essentially legal system or morality system, social control, whatever you want to call it. We're moving past that. We're evolving past that. And every society should and does. You know, you look at the utopia that's depicted in Star Trek. Everyone's personal beliefs are respected, but no one's personal belief overrides the general wellness of their society. That's what we're moving towards. People like Peter Credlin in a in a Christian ruled society would not have been allowed to write that article. And my honest belief when it comes to people like her, your Aunt Lydia's of the world, to use a Handmaid's Tale reference,
Mm-hmm.
um, they think that they will have a place in that system, and they will not, and they're delusional. The other side of me wonders, Tommy, if that perhaps they are overwhelmed with with freedom of choice and may want a more simple life, but that's their personal problem, and they should go see a therapist.
I wouldn't. I'm not going to make any personal just not going to ascribe anything personal here, but I think generally speaking, when you look at people like Peter Credlin, all of this religiosity and everything else is bullshit. They're just using it as a way to make money,
Hmm.
um to play to a base that is fundamentally Christian. So they're like, oh, what's going to work on these guys? Or if I, spruik this Christianity stuff. Because again, like you said, if the Christian world that she wants comes to pass, she is going to lose her job. She's not going to be
Yeah,
at any. She's just going to be stuck in some kind of house doing dishes, cleaning, and making food for and becoming a trad wife. So, and I don't think that's what she wants. But it's very popular to a very specific audience, and so they're going to spruik it, especially if it goes against any sort of leftism. And
yeah.
yeah,
It's a really weird audience because it's an audience of diminishing returns. But when they do pay for things, they'll hand over money hand and foot. So it's always going to be a lucrative thing. But the fact is, Australia continues to say, look, no, we're a secular society. Uh, Christians are moving into the minority. And they say, oh, well, one of the other religions will take over. And it's like they won't take over because they're even in, they're in a smaller position. The one thing that we have seen in this country is the fact that, the Muslim population is increasing, the Hindu population is increasing. Why is that? Simply because we have a lot of immigration to this country, and in those particular demographics, they do have larger families. If you want if people like Peter Credlin want more like white people having lots of kids, well, they should just improve the quality of living for everyone so that there's good childcare. Parents can actually spend time with their kids, and you don't have to work yourself into a grave to have a child that you never see. That's an option.
yeah, and stop raping kids in your
Yeah, don't
churches
do
and
that.
stuff like
That's
that.
not nice.
Like there's a reason why, and there are some people that I've seen that have commented on other articles about this where they've said that they didn't tick the Christianity box because of all of the stigma around Christian as a faith. Like a lot of people who are non-practicing. I don't know how large the sample size is of it, since this is just very anecdotal what I'm saying. But there are people who are like, oh man, yeah, the actual religion, that the organized religion does not speak for me. I don't believe in any of those values, so I'm not going to tick that box because I know what that means, right? And it's good that they're coming to that realization, because as you've rallied for a long time for people to do, is to not tick that you're Christian in the census, because we
Mhm.
make policy based off of that kind of data. And if we know that Christianity is on the decline, we don't need to appease them as much as a block, because they're less and less part of the population. And so
Yes,
we can get to doing
absolutely.
better things.
I was really happy to see the results from the census this year because, like you said, Tommy, I do advocate for people, not ticking that box if you don't, you're not religiously affiliated, and if you're not going to church and you're not going to your Bible study group, if you don't own a Bible, you're not a Christian. And the two of the greatest things that are probably going to happen out of this is the reduction of chaplains in our schools. Chaplains in our schools have led to children being abused. They've led to underqualified members of the public being given access to children. And we seem to have far more restrictions on who can be a teacher than who can be a school chaplain. So those are two big reasons. They're two big red flags. And look, if you've got to indoctrinate children who can't make their own decisions yet, well, then that speaks volumes about how palatable your religion is to adults. The other thing here is that the Christian lobby group who actively petition government to get what they want, this takes away their teeth a little bit more. And that's very important as well, because we need to really defund lobby groups like the Christian lobby, who just this week were advocating, of course, for the overturning of the Roe v. Wade situation, because
Yeah.
they see life begin at conception. I'm not going to go into all of that, other than that I completely disagree with that bullshit statement. But it is amazing to me that the Christian lobby is more than prepared to show their teeth. And then a few days later, they're told, "Well, we're not as Christian as we used to be," and now they've gone very, very quiet. And that's what we need to
Yeah.
see. We
It's
need to see them having less and less of a role in dictating what is government policy, because that affects all of us, and no one should have that overwhelming reach to be able to dictate to the rest of us how we need to think, live, and feel. And that's what people like the Christian lobby group do. So I'm very, very happy with what's happened. It still upset me though. Around that time, like anecdotally, a few people said to me, "Oh well, on my birth certificate it says I was Catholic and I didn't want to break the law." I say, "You're not breaking the law. It's completely anonymous."
Yeah.
I said, just because your parents said that you're a Catholic does not mean you're a Catholic. That's just how you were baptized. You had no choice over that. It's not legally binding. You don't have to worry about it, but some people still did that. And I think as we continue to progress over the next couple of years with the next census, I think you will see that trend of decline just keep continuing and continuing, which is a really, really good thing. Let's get public funding for actual mental health trained people into our schools. Let's defang the Australian Christian lobby. These are just great results.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty happy.
Yeah. So, right, before we move on to the next thing, I was talking to Gary in the chat about what he's been doing, and he's been talking about playing Magic the Gathering, and I asked him what his win rate was. Um, and he just told me to ask you. He says, "I like to think I have a good win rate, but I wouldn't say I'm bad. Haha. Ask Matt."
Um, it's all right.
What's
It's all right.
between you?
The
What's the beef? What's the score? The tally?
So I'm when we don't keep score when me and Gary play video games and stuff, generally because Gary kicks my ass all the time.
Mhm.
Um, I will say this: I am holding my own. The win to loss ratio has not been as bad as I expected, and I think I'm ahead. Um, However, when he wins decisively. And the last, I think out of the last 6 games we played, I won 4 or 5 of them. But one of them, he did something that infuriated me. So he got the reaction he was after, which was just me cussing him out for about 10 minutes and walking
Nice.
away from my computer.
Good work, Gary.
But I think my ratio, I think I'm still winning, but he's certainly not a bad player.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Matt. What do you want to cover? I noticed you put in some things once in the thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now we talked about religion for an hour, which is fine, because I get ranty when it comes to that stuff.
I mean, you get ranty
One
in
of the
general anyway. Let's be real, but
we
particularly
do.
for
So one of the things that I think was really important to cover this week is John Barilaro. He's back in the news because he can't just fucking disappear, can he? He's still got to get himself out there, which is what he's done.
yeah.
So this article here comes to us via the Guardian. The basics of this is that during his little stint as a deputy of New South Wales, the deputy state government of New South Wales, he switched up a recruitment process. So he helped create these trade jobs. And I don't know enough to talk about the very specifics of what these trade jobs are, but my understanding
Sounds
is
fucking ridiculous.
um, that they're trade jobs where you send out people to essentially drum up economic value in New South Wales. So you send someone out to Washington, they petition, they lobby, they talk to businesses, and they try and get some of that financial investment back to our country. Now, typically, these jobs were reserved for people who got them by merit based. So you're a bureaucrat. You've had plenty of experience dealing with government. You may also have background in economics, or you might have a background in agriculture. So you have accreditation. And then you're given those trade positions where you then go overseas and try and find that investment. That's my understanding of the bare basics of that role. Now, during Barilaro's term, he switched it from a merit-based system over to a ministerial ministerial selection. All right, a little bit different here. And then once that was sorted, and he created all these interesting little trade positions, he then resigned from government 3 days later. Now, the top contender, a female bureaucrat who was who was ready to take on that job, very qualified, she was told, sorry, but we're rejecting your job application. And she was like, oh, well, that's a bit of a shame. And then John Barilaro somehow got a job that he created himself,
Yeah. Funny
which
that.
is interesting. Dominic Perriott, who is
Perrottet.
the new sorry
Perrottet.
Perrottet, sorry, Perrottet. He, of course, is the leader of the New South Wales state government. Turned around and said that the picking of this position is completely at arm's length with the government, which makes me sad that Dom doesn't realize he's leading the government and that a ministerial selection is a government decision. So, what I feel the first thing that we need to do is sit down with Dom and ask him why he has such horrible self-esteem issues, where he doesn't realize that he is the leader of his own government. Like someone told him, right? I know he kind of got into power because Gladys Jenkins was really corrupt and they kicked her out. He does he does understand he's leading the government, right? That a ministerial selection is from his government.
Yeah, but you see, the issue is like that when this kind of controversy happens, so often these conservatives seem to just forget everything, and it's like nothing happens. There's
Yeah.
no like, oh, I don't know how he got, I don't know how he got appointed. Like, I guess it was just a
No,
random thing or something. Things seem to just
he
happen.
walked he walked in and he said to me, he goes, "I'm this now," and I said, "Okay, John, cool." And then I had a really nice sandwich for lunch that day.
Yeah,
But it's like, obviously we're being sarcastic dicks.
yeah. We know that he's been full of shit, right? Because
Yeah, he's absolutely full of shit. Now, the government can insist that the process was handled by the public service. They can insist. It's bullshit. We know it's bullshit. That's the reason why Barilaro stood down. He didn't want to go up against another ICAC investigation. That's what would have happened. The great silver lining to all of this is that we're now living in a world, just recently, mind you, if this, trust me, if the Liberal government was still in charge, if they'd won the election, we wouldn't even be hearing about this. But thankfully, they didn't. So we're now living in a world where John Barilaro can't create a position for himself and then get sweethearted into the role.
yeah. And
Now,
Matt forgot to mention, but this position would give him $500,000 a year,
yeah, half a
right?
million dollars in his pocket.
To be overseas, right? Like this kind of stuff is very questionable because, like, again, this guy has no experience. The whole position itself, I think, is strange because normally when you do country to country trade, you don't do it at a
State
state
level.
level. It's very inefficient to do that because
Yep.
again, you have to pay one person a lot of money to do what and federally you have many much more resources and have the mechanisms and things like that in place to do those kinds of things. So this is so like even from the outset, this whole thing is squiffy, and then the fact that he got put in, and it's just John Barilaro being
Whoa, whoa,
allegedly a
whoa.
very
Be careful. He'll sue
yeah,
ya.
yeah,
He'll sue ya.
being allegedly, a fairly corrupt person. I'm just assuming. I don't know. I'm just assuming that. Is
Actually,
that he
he
can?
won't sue us. He'll sue Google again because he knows that he can't win defamation against YouTubers. But
Fine. Yeah. Anyway,
Google will probably pay him out to shut up.
well, he might like. I'm just reading what's in the Guardian, so he might sue the Guardian maybe if he wants to go at it. But like, it's a position like it just seems very corrupt. It's like, okay, I can leave government and then get a cushy job, getting paid $500,000 a year and live in New York. Sick. Let's go. It's
Yep. As a New South Wales tax-paying citizen, I do not want my tax dollars to fund someone's relocation to America so that they can have a cushy life because they didn't achieve what they wanted in the political sphere. As a taxpayer, I am allowed to say that, and Mr. Barilaro is not allowed to sue me for that. So I don't want to see my tax dollars going to someone who I believe did not do a very good job when they were in parliament, and I don't want my tax dollars to reward someone's poor performance. That's and
yeah,
I'm allowed to say that without being sued because every single New South Wales resident is allowed to discuss how they want their tax dollars paid. And I don't want to see that happen. Now, the Conservatives will constantly tell you that we're no longer living in a merit-based society, that all of these appointments are woke and progressive, and that's how these people are getting in. But it's not the case because conservatives always seem to create these little cushy positions for themselves. Now, John Barilaro is independently wealthy. It's very financially lucrative to be a politician for some of them. I'm not suggesting how they achieve that. If John Barilaro wants to move to America and do business deals with American investors, then he should do what everyone else does, and that's pay for it off his own back. So he could leverage his multi-million-dollar property, go down to the bank, take out a big loan, take out a mortgage on top of his property, use that capital, go over to America, establish a hedge fund, speak with businesses, speak with investors. He can do all of that, make himself billions of dollars. I have no issue with that. But he should do it on his own dime, and he should be doing it on his own time. If he wants to be a hedge fund manager, go out there and create a hedge fund. Do the hard work. Don't just use government to get you in. If you think you're a good business person, go out and be a good business person. Go out and have those conversations. Do it off your own back. You're independently wealthy. You don't need the government supporting you like a 14-year-old kid who's still being breastfed. All right. It's time to cut that money off, John. It's time to go and live your own life and be your own person.
Yeah, but it's not can-do capitalism without a bit of government, subsidy, Matt. And also, so this
love it.
trade post was like for 3 years, but we don't know how long it could have gone for. But essentially, this role is going to cost the taxpayer $500,000 a year, right? And at the time, at this current point in time, holy shit, sorry about that. At this current point in time, there's a rail worker strike and a teacher strike, and it's like this kind of money, this level of waste could be going to pay those people and keep the state functioning, but it's not.
Yep.
Because people like John Barilaro create this stuff and siphon off the taxpayer to just live cushy lives. It's despicable.
Yeah. What would you rather see? Would you rather see $500,000 over that year being distributed accurately to people who live in a socioeconomic sphere where they'll actually put that money back into the economy, or someone like Barilaro who'll put it in his pocket? Now, personally, I'd like to see railway workers get that money because life is tough at the moment. Let's give money to the people who get us to work, who we care with our transport. They deserve that money. Give it to them. It's a much better way of stimulating New South Wales economy than sending him off on a holiday. There is a position out there that's the fuck off position, and that's called the ambassador to Washington. So if he really wants that gig, he can have some meetings with Anthony Albanese to just wait out Joe Hockey when he eventually has a heart attack and dies.
Yeah.
And then John Barilaro can have that position if he so chooses it. That's Australia's one and only fuck off position, and it should be the one and only. And I'm fine with that one. That's fine.
And that's not to mention the Cookie pointed this out in the chat that it hasn't it already cost $900K or so for the office fit out. So again, this isn't even taking into account the all of the stuff that we need to buy as Australia or New South Wales, I guess, in the US, in New York City. So, but yeah, anyway, that's John Barilaro. Hopefully we won't hear of him after this. Jesus Christ. I'm sick of seeing his mug.
It does speak, though, doesn't it, that he has had to continue to find a way for the government to pay for his existence, and he hasn't immediately moved into the private sector, which says to me that the private sector is not interested in dealing with him. Generally speaking, most of the time, they'll move straight into the private sector, unless you're someone like Tony Abbott, who the private sector doesn't want a bar of him. And so he has to keep finding ways to survive within the government structure, which is exactly what Barilaro is attempting to do.
All right, Matt, as we move on to the next story, I got to check. I think I got to knock at the door or something. What do you want to cover next? I'll just put it on screen and I'll let you talk for a couple minutes. Free? Don't make fun of me.
Chuck on. I did see you put up the Lee Sales story. Chuck that on, and I'll cover that while you go attend to your visitor.
Okay, I'll put it in a smaller thing. Anyway, okay, you can have a chat about this. Be back in a sec.
Cool. How the ABC bid farewell to famously unflappable 7:30 host Lee Sales. So I am going to bring this up as well. So reason I'm bringing this up is because we discussed in the lead up to the election how badly the media covered the former Liberal government, how it seemed that the ABC had embedded themselves with people who had, let's say, offered the Liberal government a little bit of leniency when it came to some of their shitbaggery. So Lee Sales started her final day as host of 7:30 after a 12-year stint by posting a video outside a convenience store dressed in trackies, clutching a donut and 7-Eleven coffee. Oh, how suburban. The former Washington correspondent, late line host 49, arrived at work at 7 a.m. and did 4 media interviews before 9:30 a.m. She recorded a voiceover for a special farewell program before starting the day's work on the final program in a relentless 12-hour day that she has juggled with 2 young boys for more than a decade. Sales told Guardian Australia she has no idea what she'll do next and just wants to step outside the daily news cycle, curl up on the couch with her kids. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I believe that Lee Sales is a representative of the old establishment of the ABC. We're going to see people like her vacate pretty quickly. There's also been rumblings about whether Ivor Buttrose will continue to stay in that position. I very much doubt she will. I think there'll be someone elected to look after the ABC who is far more competent and less likely to give in to a conservative bias that we've seen over the last couple of years. So, Tommy, you're back. Just to recover what I was talking about, just the fact Lee Sales is retiring and that we expect to maybe see the announcement from Ivor Buttrose in the near future about her retiring from the ABC, and just how that old guard of people who definitely had conservative bias are being kicked out of the ABC, and we're going to probably see a better form of journalism start taking place. What's your take on that?
Hopefully, I think media in Australia in general is pretty. It's like sometimes the rot is set in, and it's going to take a long time to have people that come through the ranks that are actually decent. I've been noticing on the ABC, like immediately after the election, like Insiders as a show is much better now. The last 2 to 3 episodes of it were actually like decent.
Yeah.
At least from a left wing position, I suppose. At least anyway. And like Lee Sales, I was pretty harsh on her before. I've softened a little bit on her as an individual. But yeah, I don't know how quickly the ABC is going to become better. Just like even if they do get rid of Ida Buttrose and put someone more competent or more someone with like actual journalistic standards in there. So, it's indicative of everything else that Labor is doing at the moment, right? It's like, oh, we have to start doing the thing now, and I believe that they'll do that. They'll probably do that with the ABC. They're doing that in the energy sector. They're doing that overseas. Like all of the relationships we have with the rest of the world is now reset. Is the terminology, like as if it's back to zero? And I think we have to do that with the ABC and with media in general. We need to start making the ABC an institution that will like train journalists in how to do things the right way, and hopefully the ABC will become less like Murdoch in how it approaches programming. And not just like regurgitating their headlines, but actively like making content that isn't as like content-y, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, for me, I think people like Lee Sales. She says in that article. Sorry, good old COVID cough. Lee Sales says in that article, this has been the most complex decade to cover. People will look back on it as a complex decade. She's absolutely correct. But when I ask, what's your most significant position that she took on it during her career, and I really can't think of one. There were plenty of times that Scott Morrison sat down in front of her and she didn't ask the tough questions. Yet, when you did have more left-leaning conservative leaders like Malcolm Turnbull sitting down in front of her, she seemed to scrutinize them a lot more. And I think there is really a question of journalistic integrity when it came to people like Lee Sales. We saw, just as we were leading up to the election, that the ABC had to essentially get rid of a few journalists who were put on quote-unquote administrative leave and then never returned because they had shit lists of Labor MPs that they didn't want to talk to on their social media accounts,
Yeah.
clearly demonstrating a bias. You know,
I mean,
Ivor Buttrose, for everyone forgets this all the time. Like they like to hold her up as like, look at this powerful female, look at what she's doing. Ivor Buttrose has also been on the record in years past being very, very homophobic.
yeah.
Now,
Like, I mean, like
you
that kind of
can't,
stuff, yeah, doesn't
people,
matter as much when
yeah,
it comes to your performance in the role, right? Like, you can
yes,
have those opinions of Labour people, you can have those opinions about gay people, but if that affects the ABC as an institution and your work within that institution, then, you know, you need to
yeah,
leave, basically. You need to be moved on.
yeah. And I
Because, yeah,
think under like Buttrose's leadership, we've seen the infiltration of biased journalism in the ABC, and we've definitely seen an eroding of it. And this is, you know, Lee Sales moving on. Like I'd love to. It's one of those like I call them pub conversations. I'd love to have a pub conversation with her and just say like, hey, are you retiring because you felt that your position's untenable with a better government in charge and more funding to the ABC? Is that why you're heading out? Because
I think
12 years in that, like the 730 report, like that's a like that was a prime position. Her her predecessor to that job, he was in that job for like 30 years. It was a long run for him.
yeah.
So I'm shocked that she's calling it quits after 12 years. And I'd love to have that pub conversation and say to her, you just leave him because like all your contacts dried up because they're all kicked out of government.
I don't think it'd
Is
be
that what's
that.
happened?
I think it's more that, like, there were reports of her being like bullied and stuff like that on Twitter. I think that's more of it than anything else. Like, she probably was like, I don't want to deal with that, you know? And so I'm not gonna.
I understand that. I do understand it, but let's also live in the real world. Me and Holly get attacked on Twitter, Facebook, email all the time, constantly.
Yeah.
And we knew that becoming public figures meant that people were going to be riled up, especially because we stick to historical fact. And when we're proven wrong, we turn around and say, hey, look, we were wrong about this and we make corrections. But there are, you know, when we published stuff on Ned Kelly, for example, people have very polarized views on Ned Kelly. He's either hero or he's a villain. He's nowhere in between. And I suggested that had Ned Kelly continued to do what he wanted to do, he would have eventually wound up in a category that we would refer to as a domestic terrorist because he was starting to plan to blow up government buildings. He was attacking civilian populations over ideological reasoning. I'm not going to go into all of it, but it's in my book, Weird Crap in Australia, Volume 1, if you want to check that out. We copped a lot of shit for that. But if we didn't speak authentically to who we are, then we wouldn't be being genuine. So we accept the fact that people will attack us. It hurts. It hurts every time. Even Tommy, you've done some amazing video essays on the video game world. And you've said yourself, like when you get criticized and you know you're right and people are being nasty and vindictive, it hurts. And it really does. But
Yeah.
if you want the privilege of being a public figure and you help to cultivate a world. And she did help cultivate this world by constantly giving these conservatives their unbridled platforms. If you're going to help create that world where you're riling people up through shitty journalism and then they act out on Twitter, which is exactly what you've trained them to do, you can't get upset by that. You can't be Dr. Frankenstein building a monster and then getting the shits with it when it decides to come back and ruin your life.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
I
mean,
think a
look,
lot of journalists need to think about that.
yeah, I mean, look, you can complain about it, but it is something that, the other guy didn't have to deal with. Lee Sales probably has it as has criticisms at the scale that we can't necessarily comprehend yet. So there's that. like this stuff is gonna come, and I think it's more, and I'm not necessarily like gonna attack her for doing this, but it's like it's just one of those things where you come to this level of notoriety. She was in this job. The criticisms probably came in like later on as social media got more used, and over time you can make the calls like, yeah, you know what, I don't want to deal with this, and so she steps down. The question was whether, like, why did she step down? It's 12 years. The last guy had like 30 or something. Like, why would you give up a position like that? And for the individual, it's about the calculus of, is it worth me having to deal with that for this position? And she said no. And that's fine. That's her call to make. I hope they put someone else in better, and I hope she, lives a life where she's not under that level of scrutiny and doesn't have to deal with that kind of shit anymore.
Yeah,
But when
look,
you're in the public figure, you need, and especially
absolutely.
in a program like 730, you need to have, especially now, yeah, all journalists probably need to have a lot more of that. And it's not really the best way to put it, but like the thicker skin. I'm just reading this quote here that I find I disagree, but anyways, Kerry O'Brien came through 12 years with only one prime minister. You had 6, and just the constant turmoil and constant change and constant revision that winner takes all politics brings. But nevertheless, she persisted, and in persisting, just showed this remarkable strength and resilience and perseverance. And it's like, what does a change in prime minister have to do with your job? Being a reporter. Like, does that actually
that almost says like, hey,
increased stress?
when Kerry O'Brien did it, like the status quo stayed the same. When I did it, I had to keep changing the way I interviewed people because I had to do that 6 times.
Like you're an interviewer person, Matt. So you have much more experience
Yep.
than me. But it's like, hey, because you had to interview, 6 different people instead of interviewing the one person all the time, that must have been really hard on you. But you persevered because you're a strong person. It's like, what? No, right?
The one of the trickiest things I've ever had to do in my life was like I worked when I was working for Fairfax Media. I got slowly regulated down to a cold calling desk. So you got to ingratiate yourself with people very, very quickly in a cold calling situation. So I was calling like 50, 60 strangers a day to have like in-depth business conversations with them. And it's like, this idea that you had to change tactics 6 times over a 12-year period because interviewing is hard. It does make me laugh a little bit. So you're right there, Tommy. Interviewing is
Bizarre,
fun.
dude.
Honestly, it's great fun. I
Yeah.
love talking to people. I love interviewing people. I don't get to do it as much as I used to, but it's really, really, really fun. And if that was a burden, probably not being a interviewing journalist.
Yeah, you probably
It's
shouldn't have
probably a
that
good,
job. Like, that seems like a job for someone who
yeah,
likes talking to people.
yeah, it does. It really does.
But anyway,
Um,
okay.
God, it speaks about our current, like, just what journalists expect journalism to be these days. Like, it's kind of fucking shocking. And like, look, I also, so people don't think I'm just this fucking heartless monster. I don't think anyone should be attacked on social media. Like, I really don't. It's fucking gross. It really is. Like, people getting constantly attacked. And like I said, we cop it ourselves. We get it from people who don't think we're left enough. We get it from people who don't think we're right enough. Um, we get it from people who don't feel we're centrist enough. So everyone has a fucking argument to have. And don't piss off musos. Like, we did 2 episodes on AC/DC, and then I fucking hear about that.
Amazing.
Of all the controversial topics we've covered, apparently, like, we would people's interpretation of musical history gets them very rolled up, very rolled up. So look, I don't think we need, it's fucking disgusting. But at the same time, as Tommy said, journalists have to develop a little bit more emotional distance when it comes to what people are saying about them online, because they've helped cultivate that system. It's an ugly, fucking disgusting monster. And if you don't want it to punch you in the face, try not to cultivate it as much.
Or just don't use
That's
Twitter.
or don't use Twitter, or don't use Facebook. You know, it's for people like me who live in the independent sphere, we need to use social media because without it, I don't have advertising. That's what I need to do.
Yeah.
It's how we socially engage. They don't need that. They just fucking give it to the intern. Give it to Bob, the fucking intern. He doesn't give a shit. He's happy. He's got a job.
Yeah. Like
We
you don't
actually pay
need.
for our interns in Australia generally.
Yeah. You don't. Yeah. As the host of 7:30, you don't really need like social media as a platform.
Yep.
You have like one that's broadcast to people anyway.
Yeah. Oh, I have to read Michael's comment here. Interviewing 6 people wouldn't be that hard. Being a sycophant to 6 different personalities might be a bit of a struggle.
Yep.
Got it. Like
Got him.
Oh,
All right.
that's
Next.
very astute.
Okay, I wanted to talk about
Yes, we can. It's another good cook you are. Bob the intern. Can we spin it? Yes, we can.
Nice. Nice, dude. All right, so I want to talk about foreign policy for a little bit because Albo's
Yep.
up there at the NATO summit, and what I really like about his thing is like he's not going there just for the NATO summit. He's like just blitzed Europe a little bit. Pardon my phrasing with that.
Yeah,
like...
that was good.
But like,
Yeah.
he's gone on, like he went to like Madrid. So he's talking to Spain, and then he talked to all the NATO people, and now he's in Paris. So like, you get a lot. It seems like you get a lot of value for money when the Labour goes overseas. They go to a lot of places, and they try to meet as many people as possible. And one of the things that we're seeing that's really interesting that I don't think is being covered enough, but it's the effectiveness of this new leadership in what they're doing and how it contrasts with what Morrison was doing before. So people talk about that submarine deal and how shambolic it was or whatever, and it's like, and Scott Morrison still defends what he did. The problem is that you lied to another major world leader, and there are consequences for doing that. And so Albanese had to go there and basically apologize, reset the situation, and there's pictures of them hugging and handshaking and stuff like that, and they look good. Like they look like everything's all good on that front. And one of the things that I read in this this article was that the French essentially stalled the Europe our deal with the European Union.
Yep, they did. Yep,
and that was basically just because Macron is like, yo, Scott Morrison's a liar, so like we can't do trade deals with that country because that, you know, if he's the leader of the country, like we can't do deals with them. They're going to mess us up. And so because of that, we had a stalled out trade deal that would have helped us out like immeasurably. There was this I read somewhere where it was like this trade deal would benefit Australia's GDP by 0.2%. It'll increase it. It'll increase Europe's GDP by 0.02%. So we have a lot to gain from this trade deal. And the fact that Morrison screwed the pooch on that so hard meant that like we're like a year or so behind on those kinds of negotiations. Yep. But now that we have someone good in charge, everything is looking better. And especially with the climate stuff, this trade deal, it seems like if our climate ambitions aren't high enough, they're going to essentially like do some kind of like carbon-based tariff or something on our goods if we don't meet our deadlines. And people are saying, oh, the European Union shouldn't be dictating what other people do with their own policies. And it's like, but it's a trade deal.
They're saying, this is what I fucking love about people, right? If a shitty corporation does a shitty as fuck deal and fucking pollutes or, you know, creates a slave labor force in a foreign country, people don't care, right? They're like, that's just the reality of doing business, Matt. Why are you getting so angry about it? And then when we do a deal with another country that says, look, if we are going to accept your goods, then they have to come with a percentage of carbon neutrality with them. That is a deal that we're making. And then everyone goes, they don't have the right to do that.
Yeah, it's insane.
So how can Donald Trump make a shithead fucking deal in a foreign country to build a shit hotel and everyone sucks his dick, but then the French turn around and say, if we are to accept your goods, then they need to come with a certain extent of neutrality for carbon emissions. And we're like, fuck you, Frenchman. Don't dictate to me. Like, this world is so fucked.
Yeah. Look, anyway, Matt, you need to chill
Sorry.
out. That was just like one errant comment that I saw.
I
It wasn't
know.
a comment; it was
I'm
an
just,
article or something. Someone wrote it somewhere, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's a bad take. But anyway,
I
yeah,
apologize for
it's
my
it's just
outburst.
funny, like what gets you riled up. Um, but yeah, so with Scott Morrison being in charge, this EU, like if Scott Morrison was re-elected, this EU deal might never have gone to pass, especially favorably for Australia. So,
Yeah.
holy shit. And it also goes on to, there was something else here about, this article also mentions like the Teals and Albanese being, like he's overseas now, so he doesn't have to deal with it. But the Teals, and this happened last week, we should have covered it then, but we didn't. But the Teals are whinging about, and I would like your take on this because I don't think I talked to you about this explicitly. But the Labour government came in and were like, hey, Teals, or no, hey, Crossbench, you don't get the 4 extra staffers that you got under Morrison. Okay, we need to cut costs and things like that. So you get, look, we understand your thing is harder, so you'll get 1 extra thing, and we're going to bolster up the library so that you can, use it, so it'll be better suited for use so that you can find out the information that you need on legislation. And then a lot of the Teals and people like David Pocock are complaining about the staff cuts. And I would like your opinion on that, Matt.
Yeah, so I'm actually across this because I listened to the ABC a lot while I was sick. Once again, I like Cookie's comment there. Fuck you, don't take my carbon, which isn't good job, Cookie. Uh, what happened is basically Scott Morrison needed crossbench support. So to gain that crossbench support, what they did was the Liberal Party at the time decided to give an extra 4 staffers to independents, taking them up to a staff pool of 8. That was done in order to guarantee votes. Now, obviously, David Pocock, in his position, and I don't hold this against him, I like David Pocock, is going to try and hold on to every single resource that he absolutely can. And he's going to be very vocal about it when those resources are taken away. However, we need to be running government as tightly as we can. We need to be in austerity. We've got $1 trillion worth of debt through the mishandling of COVID welfare payments. And this government will have to make cuts. So at the end of the day, Parliament only sits for so many weeks in the year, which means for the rest of the time, there's no reason that the independents and their staff can't be doing the research that they need to do so that they can vote adequately and accurately on upcoming legislation. I also understand that the independents are going to fight for every little resource that they can. The suggestion has been that because the Labor and Liberal Party are bigger parties, that they're able to shortcut acquiring information because they sort of, they get party talking notes. They have a leadership structure, and the leadership structure provides them with simplified or summarized information. And that is a valid point. But if you're running as in an independent, part of running as is in an independent is that you are your boss, right? So you don't have someone giving you talking points. It's your job to come up with your talking points. And if you can't handle that system, then you should have ran for a party, not as an independent. So yeah,
Yeah.
there will be cutbacks. And when there are cutbacks like this, they're going to occur within Parliament. And that is beneficial to the Australian taxpayer because I have said the only point I really agree with on conservatives is economic conservatism, which the Liberal Party is very bad at. Hence the fact that they gave 8 staff people to independents. So if you've got a compromise, and government is always about compromise, like they're giving them an extra staff person, taking them to 5, They're going to improve the resources and access to the parliamentary library, which I believe Weird Crap in Australia Volume 1 is sitting in that library,
Oh,
thanks to
sick.
one of our listeners.
That's awesome, dude.
So grab that book, David Pocock, have a read. Tell me what you think. Those sort of things, that's going to be the back and forth of politics. The individual is going to want all the resources they can, especially as they will need to be re-elected, so they got to show that they're doing a good job. You don't want to be working your absolute ass off, but there's also the reality of the situation. So I don't really think that the Albanese government is doing anything wrong here. I think there needs to be some sort of conservative management of financial resources in Parliament. And this deal was done. It's only a recent thing that's happened over the last couple of years, and it was only done to secure crossbench support. So it was disingenuously offered in the first place.
Yeah. So one thing I'll add is that during the Gillard days, where this was the staff allocation, same as what it was back then, they got the most legislation passed of any government in like a long time, if not ever, or something. Like they did a lot of work. So if the Teals are coming in to whinge about that, considering what those people had, is kind of disingenuous. But their framing of the thing I find annoying because it's a very selfish outlook, right? They're like, oh, we need more staff because we're independent and all this other kind of stuff. And if you want more staff and you're actually about equality and stuff like that, you should be saying that everyone in the Senate needs more staff. Because a lot of people, like, there are people who have worked as staffers for senators and things like that who are thinking, yeah, they don't need more. But then if I think about my situation when I was working there, we were all overworked. Yep. And so there is a case to be had for more staff in general, but this idea that you specifically need more staff because you're an independent, sure, you can have the one, but four? Nah. We have one more than everyone else. It's I think what you have is fine. And again, if Labor has to rein in the budget, we're not living in time, like our debt is ballooned. And so you expect, people like me and Matt to take a wage cut, and then you get all these high paid staffers to work for you and for you to do slightly less. Like it doesn't look good on your behalf. And stuff like with Monique Ryan saying stuff like, oh, like Albanese is worse than Morrison. Like he's some kind of dictator or something doing this as an authoritarian. I'm like, what are you talking about? And it goes to show like these guys may have won off of this populism, but they need to show that they can do the work of politics.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And these kind of comments don't help the situation, especially when at the same time they're saying, oh, we should be above this. We should be talking about the issues while they're just whinging about not getting enough staff.
Mm-hmm. And the when they have to ally with parties like One Nation, which I am shocked is still allowed to be a party, mind you.
Oh, well, look at those.
It really doesn't look great, especially when the Greens are staying out of it.
Yeah.
The Greens arc up about fucking everything. Everything upsets them. They've shut up. So that probably speaks to the volume.
Well, I guess they're
what's
technically
going
a
on
party, so they have a bit of machinery or whatever.
But it's not. Now is not the time to be fussing about how many staffers you have. You've got 5 staff people. If you're a good politician, go out and do the work.
And it's also like
the work is there to be done.
There's no reason that you, even as an independent, you wouldn't also talk with other people to figure out how a legislation is good or bad, right?
Absolutely.
So with your fellow independents, you could be like, well, yeah, well, we can, screw Labor around on this. You can talk to each other and be like, okay, look, and this is why people form parties, is because it's more efficient, okay?
Yep.
Where you go, hey, Pocock, bro, why don't you look at this part of the legislation? You get your due to do that. I'll get my due to look at this part of the legislation. We come together, we can chat about it and see where we can screw over Labor the most, right? But again, their idealism of being independent gets in the way of them doing actual work. and that's my
Yeah.
problem that I've had before. Like, look, I'll take them over a lib because the liberals are completely gone in terms of doing effective policy. So I hope that they do good. But again, like their independence and like that being part of their like almost like their identity is, I think, going to get in the way of them passing legislation potentially, and that's a concern.
Yeah, they don't need to, and I'm not suggesting that they need to side with Labor on everything. If they don't believe that a Labor policy that's been put forth is worth voting on, don't vote
Yeah,
for it. That's
absolutely.
why you're in Parliament. You're there as a representative of your constituency. Do your job. That's your job. But there's also no reason that if you are coming up against foreign policy legislation, that you can't go up to Penny Wong and say, "Hey, what's your experience been like in these particular theaters around the world? What's our relationship like with Japan? Should I vote on this trade agreement with them? What's your opinion on this?" Because whether they realize it or not, and it's probably because they're so new to the political system, both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party are going to send people to have meetings with them to discuss policy anyway. They are going to be
Yeah.
across policy, and the Libs are going to put forward their position. The Labor Party is going to put forth their position. And then what you do is after you have those meetings, you then turn around to your staffer and you go, "Okay, I want you to fact check both of these positions and come back to me."
Yeah. Like I think most what their main concern is not like because they're not going to trust anything the parties say. They're just
Mm,
concerned like what they want people to like comb over the legislation and advise them on that kind of stuff, which is fine. But again, you can pool your resources and maintain your independence from the parties. You just need to be fucking smart about it. And all this whinging
mm.
doesn't help. And I've seen a lot of people saying that Labor need to back down on this. They can't afford this kind of bullshit. I'm like, there's no reason Labor needs to back down on this because
Yeah,
they're there to be
especially
fiscally responsible
it's
and to manage a
yeah,
government, and so that's what they're going to do. If like they can, the independents can and the crossbenchers can complain about it, but to cede ground to them would mean that Labor would concede ground on every other policy ever, and it's like no, you
yep.
wouldn't, you're not going to do that.
If this is the first tantrum, if this is the first test of what working with independents looks like, well, Anthony Albanese has turned around. He's compromised, so they get a little bit of what they want, while also saying you're not going to get everything you want, and this is how my government is going to operate. And they can continue to waste time for weeks and weeks on end debating this, or they can start doing their jobs that they're elected to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Apparently they've softened
If
on the position a little bit, but
Yeah,
so
it's like
but
if
we'll
your
see.
effectiveness is simply based on whether you have 8 people around you or 5, then how about we don't use you as a representative and instead just have those 8 people doing your job anyway?
Yeah.
They got to make a choice. And as Australians around this country are going to suffer through enormous financial hardship. And right now, you know, the guy who predicted the GFC in 2008, guess what he's saying? There's
Recession.
another one on the way.
Yep.
The Albanese government is probably going to cop another financial crisis, a really, really fucking big one,
Yeah, and we're in a
right?
way worse fiscal situation as well with the debt that we have.
Ex-
Um,
Exactly. Making everything as tight as possible now so that as effective functioning is going to save us a lot of fucking pain and torment in about probably a year's time, maybe even less.
yeah. Shit, there was a thing I was gonna say about this that I completely forgot. It was oh, okay. So one of the first things that Labor are doing in terms of this legislation, like as a test. So I wrote here that so one thing, Albo choosing to reside in the lodge as PM is good because what the goddamn liberal people do is they go and chill in Kirribilli House, which is more expensive. It's in Sydney, and so the Prime Minister has to go from Parliament and then go to Kirribilli House in Sydney, right? And Albo, being a pragmatist, is like, no, I'm just going to stay at the lodge that's in Canberra, the nation's capital, where it's supposed to be. Like the whole point of the lodge was that it was the place where the prime minister goes because he can just go from there to parliament, and you don't have to go around the country to live and to legislate. So that's
Yep.
good. And also, I think there's a neat strat of legislating the climate target. So Albanese wants to legislate the climate target, and people are like, why would you do that if you're already saying that you're going to reach those targets even if you don't legislate it, right? What's the point of it?
So
And
I
I
can
think what
guarantee it happens.
well, I mean, I don't even necessarily think it'll be a guarantee, but like making it law means that it motivates more people to do it. But also, I
Mm.
think that is um what Labor intended as the test for this current group of parliamentarians, because we can see from this first part of this first piece of legislation that they're going to put through how belligerent the Greens are going to be, how belligerent the crossbench is going to be on these kinds of issues, and I think it's a really smart move because they're like, we're going to get ahead of this anyway, but let's see how you guys react to it. Are you going to vote it down? Are you the Greens going to side with the Nats and the coalition on climate? Right? Are you going to do that? And then they'll be able to feel out how to like they don't like Labor have made this legislation in I think in a strategy where they can't lose, and they just
Yep.
get information on how other people are going to behave, and I think that's really smart.
Yep. I agree.
But yeah, that's my thing. Matt, do you got something else, or it's almost hitting on 2 o'clock?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to run because I gotta
Yeah.
start doing some writing. I got Killaroo Volume 2. I gotta get done. It keeps getting delayed, but life is life. No, that's pretty much the week that I wanted to cover there. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. And apologies for last week. Obviously, COVID is going to be
Yeah.
running around, and I would caution everyone: please go get vaccinated if you haven't been. If you're still worried about it, go talk to your GP, go talk to another GP, go talk to 15 GPs. If you have health concerns because of pre-existing conditions, I get that. Get your flu shot, get your booster for COVID, get your COVID vaccine. People are already dying. Hospitals are filling up. ACT hospital is currently seeing at 150 patients with COVID. Then the government is not going to legislate and protect you anymore. So
Yeah.
you're going to have to look after yourself. And if you want to be I won't wear a mask because it goes against my personal freedom, that is fine. But also accept that you could end up in a hospital as well. So at the very least, if you're not going to wear a mask, go get vaccinated unless you have a pre-existing medical condition. For the love of God.
Yeah.
It's
Like
going to be rough.
yeah, the vaccine is going to help you, even if you're probably gonna get it in this climate. Everyone around me has, I think, gotten it. I've dodged it the last couple times in terms of reinfection, but
Yep.
like we don't know if how Matt and Holly would have fared if they weren't vaccinated.
I
Probably
can
would have been
tell you,
worse.
I can tell you right now, Tommy, if what I copped was a reduced version of the virus, I would not like to have seen just cooking dinner so that we had some food was difficult. And that's just cooking a small meal for 2 people. That was difficult. Just doing the basics of making sure we had clean clothes was difficult. Imagine doing that with kids as well, having kids in the house. It's not very nice. And please go out and get vaccinated. I'm a big believer in vaccines. I've had vaccines my entire life. I do have a tail, but it helps me get things off the shelf.
Yeah. All
So
right, Matt. Plug your shows and your
Play,
things stuff.
absolutely. We're Crap in Australia. That's my podcast I host with my wonderful researcher wife, Holly Soul. We cover all this strange minutiae from Australian history, paranormal activity, aliens, UFO encounters, serial killers, weird political stories. We talked about the fall of the Gough Whitlam government, if you're curious about that. You can check all of that out on wherever you get your podcasts. We're on every single platform. We Crap in Australia is the name. New episodes release every Monday. If you would like to check out our live show, Weird Crap in Australia is coming to GammaCon on the 23rd and 24th of July. We'll be doing 2 live shows. And we'll also be doing a preview reading of our new book, We're Crap in Australia, Volume 3. If you'd like to check out Volume 1 and 2, you can head to lulu.com, or you can grab it from our great mates at impactcomics.com.au. Both of those are in paperback. If you're a ebook person like myself, well, actually, no, that's disingenuous. I still buy paper comics and lots of paper books. But if you are an ebook person, you can grab We Crap in Australia, Volume 1 and 2 from the Kindle store. If you'd like to grab a copy of my graphic novel, Killaroo Semper Fi, you can grab that from your local Australian comic book store, or you can grab that from killaroo.com. And
nice.
find us on all the social medias. We're Crap in Australia on Facebook, Instagram, We're Crap in Oz on Twitter.
Yeah, cool. Nice. Go check Matt out. Hopefully we'll be back next week. Maybe I'll get COVID. I don't know.
And check out Tommy's YouTube channel, which is really
God
good.
damn, I don't know how to. Oh man, I don't know how to mute this thing.
Get it.
Anyway, enjoy
Get
Matt's thing that he made. He basically just made the revival part less shit.
I did.
So,
I put in a lens flare.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
But anyway, hopefully we'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.